This is Everyday Wellness, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve your health and wellness goals and provide practical strategies that you can use in your real life. And now, here is your host, nurse practitioner Cynthia Thurlow.
Today, I am joined by Dr. Robert Lustig. He is an emeritus professor of pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and a member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF. Dr. Lustig is a neuroendocrinologist with expertise in metabolism, obesity, and nutrition. He is one of the leaders of the current anti-sugar movement that is changing the food industry. He graduated from MIT, received his MD from Cornell, received his Master's of Studies in Law degree at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. He is the author of the popular books Fat Chance, The Hacking of the American Mind, and the just released Metabolical, The Lure and Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. Pleasure to have you with me this afternoon. Thank you so much for carving time out of your busy schedule.
That's my pleasure, Cynthia. It's part of my job now, so it's quite all right.
Yeah. So talk to us about how food has largely become poison. You know, I read your most recent book with great interest. And I think for many people, the assumption is made that if it's in the grocery store or if it's at the corner market, it's obviously healthy. And you and I would both agree that most of the food-like substances that people are consuming nowadays are anything but real or anything that is metabolically supportive of a healthy lifestyle or healthy body.
Well, first you have to know what healthy means. And in order to know what healthy means, you have to know what health means. And I will tell you right now, healthcare don't know. And, government don't know. And to be honest with you, modern medicine don't know. And, I lived within that ecosystem for 40 years. I was trained to do exactly what all the other doctors were trained to do. And then I started doing research. And what I realized was that the data that I was generating did not conform to the party line. And, the more data, the more I realized it. And so, in 2007, I started speaking out about what I thought was the biggest problem in nutrition, which was not hide the ball sugar, and I got a lot of pushback for obvious reasons from many different directions, including academia, but, certainly food industry. And, we did more research and, things continued to fall out. And what I then realized was that there was an entire treasure trove of work, of research that had been done back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, before the original dietary guidelines for Americans. And it had been basically deep-sixed. Mm-hmm. And when we realized who deep-sixed it, we realized it was the food industry. Yeah. So we've been sort of living a fraud for the last 50 years. And we've watched, our population get sicker and sicker and chew through more and more healthcare resources. And, it just became painfully obvious that, we needed as a, individually and also as a society, a metabolic reset. So originally, I wrote my first book, Fat Chance, back in 2013, to dispel the standard notion that people had, which was you are what you eat. Now, I will tell you, that was actually never stated, okay? What was stated was, tell me what you eat and I will tell you what you are. That was Brias-Savarin back in 1825. But ultimately, that got bastardized to you are what you eat, which are not the same thing. And who did it? The food industry. Mm-hmm. But that's what everyone believes for, want of a better answer. Nobody else had any reason to say otherwise. I knew that that was not true. And in 2013, I published Fat Chance to restate the argument. You are what you do with what you eat, what you metabolize. That metabolism is more important than calories, for instance. Okay, calories are basically useless. And in metabolical, I do my ultimate best to try to kill the calorie. And, that is my goal now. I'm the unspoken leader of, kill the calorie. If I will be known for anything in my next life, it will be as the guy who killed the calorie. So Fat Chance was, you are what you do with what you eat. But then over the last 8 years, working in this field and working with colleagues who were working on the industry side of this, the public policy side of this, it became painfully apparent that there was this treasure trove of information that had been deep-sixed, and that the food industry was basically writing its own narrative to keep us consuming. And so then I realized that I had to rewrite the book, if you will. And the point of Metabolical is to state you are what they did with what you eat.
So beautifully stated. And there's so much to unpack there. I think there's such a large degree of cognitive dissonance. It makes people very uncomfortable, not just patients, but clinicians. It makes us very uncomfortable because it bucks along with, how I was trained. I trained at a big research institution myself. And certainly the information that I was given in the 1990s, both as a nurse and later as a nurse practitioner, is completely contrary to what I now know and believe. And do you think it was a byproduct of, we use the term multifactorial when we're in the medical environment? I think there are so many reasons for why we got so derailed. I think a great deal about what I have learned through Ansel Keys' work, conversations I've had with Nina Takeholtz and Gary Taubes, who've done a beautiful job, as well as you, kind of illustrating the history of how this has all evolved. But I do think a large amount of this is also exacerbated by the fact that, we as healthcare professionals are given little to no education. And I know in your book, you do a really beautiful job talking about registered dietitians. And I definitely want to touch on that as well, that they've propagated and aligned themselves largely, although I do know some evolved RDs have aligned themselves with the processed food industry and big ag and all of these industries that benefit from keeping us in the dark, misinformed, and metabolically unhealthy.
Indeed. Ultimately, dietitians can be part of the problem or they can be part of the solution. The sad part is that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has chosen to be part of the problem. And the reason is because they get 90% of their operating budget from big food. So there are plenty of dietitians who are, quote, woke, who get it, all right, who understand that it's not about calories. Okay, so what I do in the book is I basically rephrase this for them. It's not what's in the food. That's what dietitians are trained to add up because it's math. Rather, it's what's been done to the food. That's processing. And that's something dietitians are not trained to know anything about. So dietitians basically have to understand the science. They have to understand the science of nutrition, sure. They also have to understand the science of food processing, food science, if you will. And they're not the same. A lot of dietitians, a lot of doctors think they are the same. Nutrition is what happens between the mouth and the cell. Food science is what happens between the ground and the mouth. And what we've learned is that when you alter the food science, you alter the nutrition. So you need to understand how those two work in concert. The problem is when you alter the nutrition, you don't alter the food science. All right, because the food science is upstream. So that's where the efforts have to be. And so that's why I spend an entire part of the book, part 4, on explaining what they did to the food to make it poison. Now, people say, well, food's not poison, food's food. Well, actually, that's not true. All right. And I'll give you, my favorite example, because it's the easiest example for me to talk about since it's my research. Okay. And that's sugar. All right. So when you talk about poison, you're talking about what? Keel over and die? Yeah, that's one kind of poison. That's an acute poison. And there are plenty of acute poisons, cyanide, ricin, sarin, VX gas, things like that. Okay. That's all true. And that's, parts per billion, keel over and die, all true. But there are also chronic poisons. They don't kill you immediately. They kill you over time. So arsenic or carbon tetrachloride or tobacco smoke. Okay. One cigarette won't kill you, but, 10,000 over 10 years certainly might and will. Well, processed food is in that same category. And in particular, because it carries a chronic toxin. And that chronic toxin is called sugar. So you say, wait a second, sugar, it's energy. Well, actually, it's not. If you burn it in a bomb calorimeter, it's energy. It releases 4 calories per gram, just like carbohydrate does, just like protein does. Those are all 4 calories per gram when you burn them in a bomb calorimeter. But we're not bomb calorimeters. Mm-hmm. All right. And that's where the dietitians get it wrong, because that's what calories are, is what do you get when you burn them in a bomb calorimeter? Who cares? Because we're not bomb calorimeters. Now, turns out sugar, fructose, the molecule in sugar that is sweet, the molecule that is enticing, the molecule that is, in fact, addictive, also inhibits 3 separate mitochondrial enzymes. One called AMP kinase, which is responsible for manufacturing new mitochondria and keeping them up to date and fresh. Number 2, ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary for being able to oxidize fatty acids to make ATP out of them, which is the mitochondria's job. So if you're inhibiting it, you're inhibiting mitochondrial function. And number 3, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, which is the shuttle mechanism by which fatty acids get into the mitochondria for burning in the first place. The transport is through a molecule called carnitine, which I know as a cardiology preventative nurse, you know lots about. Okay, but you have to regenerate the carnitine, and the molecule the enzyme that does that is the CPT1. Well, fructose inhibits CPT1 through its effects on malonyl-CoA via uric acid. So 2 direct inhibitions and 1 indirect inhibition of mitochondrial function. So you say fructose is energy because it generates 4 calories per gram. But if fructose stops you from being able to make ATP in your cells, how is that energy? So this whole concept of calories just has to go through the friggin' window, okay? My job is to kill the calorie. The Economist magazine published a wonderful article last year called The Death of the Calorie, explaining all of this in scientific terms, okay? Bottom line is, if your dietitian believes in calories, fire them. That simple. Fire them. Or worse, okay? Because that means they're only focused on the math, not the science. And this is where the dietitians either get on the bus or get off the bus. So, if there are any dietitians out there listening, go ahead, all right? I'm calling you out now. Email me. We can have the debate, okay? And I will win, I promise.
I'm so glad that you're having this discussion. It is probably the most common question I get on social media because I talk a lot about intermittent fasting. People say, well, how many calories a day do you eat? I was like, I don't count calories. My body doesn't recognize the calories. And one of the quotes in the book is, calories are the industry's shield. It's how they hide from culpability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really profound. For people that are listening, if you still embrace the calories in, calories out, that CECO, or you don't think that there's more to it than that, it's just a little too convenient to think that that's all our bodies recognize.
Right. So, people say, well, you eat too much, you exercise too little. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm not arguing that. I mean, we do eat too much. We eat, 300 to 400 calories more than we used to 25 years ago. That's true. And exercise too little. There's some data to actually support that, although it's a little bit fuzzier. The question is why? Not do we, but the question is why do we? And the answer is leptin resistance. So there is this hormone made by your fat cells called leptin. And leptin, when your fat cells fill up with fat, your fat cell makes leptin, it goes into the bloodstream, goes to the brain and says to the brain, hey, I've got enough energy on board to engage in expensive metabolic processes because I'm not starving. Leptin means I'm not starving. So I can burn energy at a normal rate. Therefore, I can exercise and will want to. I can go through puberty. I can go through pregnancy because I can carry a baby to term because there's enough energy on board to be able to do it. Starved people can't carry a baby to term. Their leptin levels are low, and it keeps their brain from actually being able to support a pregnancy. So leptin signaling tells your brain, I'm not starving. Therefore, defective leptin signaling tells your brain, I am starving. Obese people are not getting the leptin signal. They got plenty of leptin, but it's not getting to the brain. The brain's not interpreting it. So they have what we call leptin resistance, high leptin, but low leptin effect. And because they have high leptin and low leptin effect, their brains tell their bodies, hey, I need more leptin. So I need to eat more. And it also tells their muscles, hey, I'm starving, so you better sit on the couch instead of going and playing tennis. So the gluttony and the sloth that we associate with obesity is really a manifestation of a biochemical process called leptin resistance. So then you say to me, okay, well, all right, that's fine. Well, what's causing the leptin resistance? How come the leptin's not working? And the short answer to that is the hormone insulin. Insulin blocks leptin. Okay, now insulin is the hormone that drives the energy into fat in the first place. So it's telling your fat cell store. But normally your insulin tells your brain, hey, I'm in the middle of metabolizing a meal. I don't need any more. So that's part of the stop signal. So insulin's kind of weird because it tells your fat cell one thing, store, and it tells your brain the opposite, stop. Except when your brain is insulin resistant, then now the insulin doesn't work, and now your leptin doesn't work, and now you keep eating like there's no tomorrow. So insulin resistance causes leptin resistance, which causes both gluttony and sloth. In other words, your biochemistry drives your behavior. So what we learned to do at UCSF in our obesity clinic, we did this for 17 years while I was director of the obesity clinic, get the insulin down. When you get the insulin down, now the leptin can be seen. Now the leptin works. And now, guess what? Your food intake goes down and your exercise goes up spontaneously by itself. And we've done all the controlled studies to demonstrate this pathway, this mechanism. So then you say, okay, well, so the insulin's high, so we got to get the insulin down. Well, what made the insulin go up? And that's where we get to sugar.
No.
There's a new product I'm totally hooked on. It's called Mito Pure by Timeline Nutrition. Cellular energy is like your personal health speed limit. When your energy level is low, your body's health processes slow down too. Rebuilding cellular energy is essential to good health, particularly as we age. Now, my friends at Timeline Nutrition have launched a product called Mito Pure to help boost cellular energy and get your body back in the fast lane. I trust Timeline Nutrition and have been so impressed by their science, so much so that I am personally taking it as well as the hubs, and I recommend it to you. We've been taking over the last several weeks, and we absolutely feel like not only are we sleeping better, we have more energy for our workouts, and we have more energy in the morning without caffeine. Improving your mitochondria is one of the best things you can do for your health. With Mito Pure from Timeline Nutrition, it has never been easier. Go to timelinenutrition.com and use my promo code EWP for 10% off the plan of your choice. Again, go to timelinenutrition.com and use my promo code EWP for 10% off the plan of your choice.
Is something preventing you from achieving your goals or interfering with your happiness? Check out betterhelp.com/EWP. It's been my experience as a nurse practitioner and a clinician that there are oftentimes not enough resources for mental health, not only for my own patients, but in even talking to family and friends. And BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist in a safe and private online environment that is super convenient. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they can make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. And best yet, the service is available for clients worldwide. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/EWP. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/EWP. And it's interesting to me as I've watched patient population become increasingly sicker, more diseased over the last 20 plus years, and how we're starting to see a shift where there's more focus on the hormones that are mitigating a lot of these behavioral choices, and recognizing that it's not that someone doesn't want to stop eating. It's that their brain, as you mentioned, and their stomach and their fat cells, there's this lack of communication. It explains why when my children were younger, they noticed, and they were asking, as young children do, they ask questions, just really from a place of wanting clarification, why someone that they saw sitting at a restaurant had so much food in front of them and they were obviously morbidly obese, and having to explain that there's a hormone miscommunication going on in their bodies. And so I think when, especially as a healthcare provider, when you can look at it from that perspective, it gives you profound pause in terms of how you want to view what is growing to be an increasingly, diseased population. I think the statistic I looked at was 88% of Americans have metabolic syndrome, have this dysregulation. That's unbelievable. You're really an outlier if you don't.
That's right. In fact, it's much more common to have metabolic dysfunction than not nowadays. And all you have to do is look at the data on the 8 chronic metabolic diseases that are due to mitochondria. And here they are: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. These are 8 diseases, are the diseases of mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's why they tend to travel together. Because if your mitochondria are not working in one organ, chances are they're probably not working in another organ also. And so that's why these 8 diseases have cropped up to basically take over healthcare. And that's why it is breaking the medical bank. Worse yet, and this is, the point I try to stress in the book, there's no pill for this, because there's no pill that gets to the mitochondria and makes it work. The only thing you can do is prevent the mitochondrial dysfunction by preventing the toxin from reaching it. Well, that means cut your sugar, increase your fiber, because fiber also is important in terms of inhibiting sugar absorption early on. And it also helps feed the gut, in terms of feeding the microbiome, which has its own beneficial effects in terms of insulin suppression and immune suppression as well. So bottom line, you need to have a low sugar, high fiber diet. That's what we need. That's called real food. Unfortunately, that's not what the 10 major food conglomerates are selling. They're selling a high sugar, low fiber diet. That's called processed food. And so to come back to the very first question you asked me about what's healthy. So the FDA doesn't have a definition for healthy. The USDA doesn't have a definition for healthy. They're trying to come up with a definition for healthy. I actually, in the book, propose a definition for healthy. 6 words, 2 clauses, 6 words. Protect the liver, feed the gut. Any food that does both is healthy. Any food that does neither is poison. Any food that does one or the other, but not both, is somewhere in the middle. And that's actually what the empiric data bear out. And I show in the book how that works. Example, juice. So juice is not as bad as soda. That's true. It's still bad, but it's not as bad as soda. And I agree with that. Okay. But it's still bad. Now, the juice companies are saying, got vitamin C, right? Quick energy raises your blood sugar, especially if you're hypoglycemic, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All garbage. Juice does have soluble fiber. The inulin, the pectins, okay, juice still has those. That's good. But it doesn't have the insoluble fiber. That's been removed. The insoluble fiber is the cellulose, the stringy stuff. Okay. You need both, because when you have both, the insoluble fiber, like the cellulose, forms like a lattice work on the inside of your duodenum. And the soluble fiber, like the pectins and the inulin, plug the holes in that lattice work. So together, they form an impenetrable secondary barrier that lines your duodenal, your intestinal lumen. You can actually see it on electron microscopy, a whitish barrier. And what that barrier does is it prevents early absorption of simple sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose, from getting into the portal vein to going to the liver, thereby protecting your liver. But if you don't have the cellulose because it's been stripped away because it's juice, or because you put it in a smoothie machine, a Vitamix or a Breville, you've basically chopped that lattice work up into smithereens. It can't form that lattice work, that fishnet. So you can't assemble that barrier. So you still end up flooding the liver because you can't block it. Now, the soluble fiber will still be there. It will go further down the intestine. The intestinal bacteria will be able to metabolize it for its own purposes, because that's the food for the bacteria. And they will turn it into short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and those are good. And I'm not saying that's bad, that's good. All right. And those suppress insulin, and those also suppress your cytokine response. So that's actually important for COVID. So those are good things, but you still poisoned your liver. And so when you look at the data, the empiric data on juice, it's not as bad as soda, but it's still bad. Okay. And I can show you a zillion meta-analyses that show that juice predisposes you, causes diabetes as well.
Well, and I think that in so many ways, it's thought of as being so benign. I recall, I'm rounding with the cardiology group I work for in the hospital, sometimes the ICU and the cardiology step-down units. And what were my cardiac patients being given for breakfast? It was white bread with faux butter, because God forbid you give them real butter. Right. And there was always juice. They had their choice of juice, and then they always had soda. And I thought to myself, what is going on that we have gotten to a point where we think that these things are beneficial for our patients? And the fiber piece is one that even myself, as I was reading your book, and I eat quite a bit of vegetables, I'm very diligent about that, non-starchy vegetables, really caused me a pause, because I believe that fiber sometimes gets a bad rap. The irony is I was thinking about those Fiber One bars as I was reading your book, not because I consume them. I think I've only consumed one once, and it made me so gassy. It was distressing. Right. But the point being that fiber is thought of as being, I think, in many ways a negative thing. And yet, what you're clearly delineating is how critically important it is to help protect the integrity of our digestive system and ultimately our blood sugar, our liver, and our gut health.
Right. Well, the fact is the food industry doesn't want you to like fiber. All right. They very specifically don't, because fiber means decreased eating time for food. It doesn't last as long on the shelf. And so the more fiber it has, the quicker it will spoil. So it's easier to squeeze it, freeze it, lasts forever. You've turned a food into a commodity that you can sell on the commodities exchange. And so since it doesn't go bad, it's there forever. So, let the price work. So the bottom line is fiber works against the food industry's profit interests, but fiber works for our health interests. So this is a direct, contradiction between what's good for us versus what's good for them. And ultimately, when it comes down to processed food, whatever's good for them is bad for you, and whatever's good for you is bad for them. This is a war. Okay. The difference is that it is an asymmetric war, because you got to eat. Right. And it's also an asymmetric war because they have the information and you don't, and they're winning. And
they like to keep consumers ignorant to what is actually going on.
Exactly.
One of the things I love that you kind of alluded to and discussed in the book is the role of big pharma. And for anyone that's listening, we have largely conditioned our patient population that a symptom requires a pharmaceutical drug. And so big pharma has profited enormously off of our health. And so one of the statistics I wanted to make sure I shared with listeners, of the top 11 pharmaceutical companies, the net profits are $75 billion a year. The industry is 2/3 of the FDA's budget. There are over 1,300 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to push their agenda. And they spend more on marketing than they do on research and development. So they do everything they can to drive our desire to ask for prescriptive medications instead of really changing the way that we fuel our bodies and live our lives. And this is incredibly distressing. The other thing that I thought was interesting is for every $1 of research, Big Pharma spends $19 on promotions and advertising.
That's right. So, they know where their bread is buttered, as it were. That's what makes them money. And they're not doing it because they're losing it. That's for sure. So, we have to basically, look askance at their practices and determine, why are they doing this and why is this affecting us? And what I try to do in the book is basically lay that out so that people can understand what the issues are. Ultimately, Big Pharma has generated a pill for, type 2 diabetes. They've generated a pill for hypertension. They've generated a pill for cardiovascular disease. They've generated a pill for, just about everything. Now we even have a medicine for dementia. Whether it works or not is another story. The bottom line is these pills, statins, oral hypoglycemics, antihypertensives, they're not treating the disease. They are treating the symptom of the disease, because the disease is actually subcellular. It's going on inside the cell. Mitochondrial dysfunction is sort of the outgrowth of all of that. But there are actually 8 subcellular pathologies, and those pills don't touch any of them. And here they are. 1, glycation. 2, oxidative stress. 3, mitochondrial dysfunction. 4, insulin resistance. 5, membrane instability. 6, inflammation. 7, methylation. 8, autophagy. These 8 subcellular pathologies are the difference between whether you will be 110 playing tennis or 40 years old with 2 stumps on a dialysis machine waiting for your next stroke. Those 8 subcellular pathologies, I call them in the book the hateful or the grateful 8. When you look at the molecular mechanisms by which those occur, there are no drug targets, but they all respond to food. But what kind of food? They respond to omega-3s, they respond to, vitamin D, they respond to, a host of other, components in food, and all of them are killed by fructose. They're all killed by sugar. All right. So the bottom line is, if you want those 8 pathologies to be working for you instead of against you, you have to eat real food. So the pharma industry doesn't want you to know they're just treating symptoms of disease rather than the actual disease. So, this is the problem. This is the dichotomy. Okay. In order to solve a problem, you have to work upstream of the problem. An easy analogy, an easy metaphor, which I start the book with. There's a wasp buzzing around your attic. What do? Kill the wasp or find the wasp's nest? You have to work upstream of a problem to solve a problem. Working downstream of a problem only solves the result of the problem. It doesn't solve the cause of the problem. And if you want this problem to go away, you have to deal with the cause, not the result. And we're not doing that. And we haven't done that for the last 50 years, which is why modern medicine has gone to hell in a handbasket.
I agree. And, it's interesting because you bring up so many different nuances to this problem. A lot of it's policy related. A lot of it, requires that the government actually take a stand. Whether or not that's more easily said than done, I think you probably would agree that it would be like moving mountains. But what are some of the things that, the USDA could be doing to help from a nutritional standpoint that would be of benefit? And what are some of the impediments to this actually happening? Because there are some financial things that are driving, continuing on this path and kind of pretending to play ostrich and dig our heads in the sand and pretend there isn't actually a larger issue.
Right. I couldn't agree more. So in the book, I describe, all these issues. And people ask me all the time, like, if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing, what would you get the most bang for your buck out of to try to fix this problem? If you could fix one thing. And what I say is I would get rid of food subsidies. Mm-hmm. I would get rid of all food subsidies because they distort the market. That's the nature of food subsidies, is to distort the market. Right? And there's no economist on the planet that believes in distorting the market. Let the market work. I agree with that. Even libertarians should be able to agree with that. So food subsidies do not make sense. Now, once upon a time, food subsidies did make sense. That was 1933. We had a depression. We had a dust bowl. We had a destitute population in the American Southwest, and we had all the food in the Northeast. We had to get the food from the Northeast to the Southwest. And the problem was, if you just put the food on the grain, the cargo railroad cars, by the time it reached the Southwest, it would all have gone rancid. So the processed food industry kicked into high gear and started processing all the wheat and all the barley and everything, and basically put it into 10-pound, and the sugar, put it into 10-pound bags and shipped it that way. And then they would bake it up when they, where they got. And we saved an entire population. And you know what? That made sense. And the subsidies rewarded those companies for doing this. And that made sense all the way through World War II. But after World War II, we didn't have a dust bowl. We didn't have a depression. We didn't need those policies to stay in place. But the food industry had figured out, hey, we can make money doing this. And so they lobbied, and we doubled down, and we actually supported even further subsidies. And then in 1971, Richard Nixon, carrying on Johnson's war against poverty, realized that fluctuating food prices cause political unrest. And so he told his agriculture secretary, Earl Rusty Butts, love that name, okay, make food cheap. And Butts went out to the heartland, to Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa, and said basically three things: row to row, furrow to furrow, get bigger, get out. That was his, way to fix this problem. And so what that did was that ushered in the era of monoculture. So that's why all the corn is in Iowa and all the cattle are in Kansas. Cattle used to be in Iowa, living on the farm and pooping, on the farm, and the poop was the fertilizer for the farm. Okay. And that worked. Okay. Then we moved the cattle to Kansas. Now the poop is in Kansas and nothing to do with it. Okay. Except make the other cows sick. So we have to give them antibiotics to keep them alive. Otherwise, succumbing to some GI dysentery because, all the CAFOs are, completely overrun. And we have all the corn in Iowa, and it's got to get sprayed with nitrogen fertilizer because there's no nitrogen because the cows are in Kansas and there's no poop. All right. So the nitrogen fertilizer, makes the corn grow. That's fine, except for one problem. Okay, it's growing in dirt rather than soil, so the soil's dead, but the corn grows. But the problem is that the nitrogen runoff creates nitric oxide, which is the worst greenhouse gas. Everybody talks about methane in the cows. Nitrous oxide is way worse, way worse. It has 250 times the heat trapping capacity of carbon dioxide, and it lasts 114 years. So the more nitrogen fertilizer we spray, the worse our climate gets. Okay, and all of this occurred because of the change in our food system to promote and procure and to cheapen the cost of processed food. So how can you undo that? How can you unravel that? And the answer is don't make it so cheap for the food industry to make processed food. Get rid of the food subsidy. So could we do that? And the answer is absolutely we could. People say, wait a second, that would make food more expensive. Well, the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley actually did this modeling exercise back in 2007. What would the price of food look like if we got rid of all food subsidies? And it turns out the price of food wouldn't change, except for two items, which would go up: corn and sugar, exactly what we would want to go up. Mm-hmm. So to me, the first thing that has to be done is get rid of food subsidies. The problem is only government can do that. Problem is government doesn't want to do that. And the reason is because the processed food industry owns the government.
Today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive daily nutritional beverage I have ever tried. With so many stressors in our life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients it needs to thrive. Busy schedules, poor sleep, too little exercise or too much, the environment, stress, or simply not eating enough of the right foods can leave us deficient in key nutrients. And this is where Athletic Greens can help. Now, I have to be totally transparent and tell you that most, if not all, green powders I have tried are nearly impalatable, but I've really enjoyed Athletic Greens, as does my husband. So one scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, greens, superfood blend, and more that all work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, which everyone knows I'm super particular about, and supports a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. So right now, Athletic Greens has got you for year-round immune support by offering my audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit my link today. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/EWP. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/EWP and get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today.
We believe our physical and emotional health is directly tied to what we eat. Plan to Eat was born from a desire to eat real food, great food prepared at home together as a family. My hope is that Plan to Eat will be a tool to help you prepare a delicious, wholesome food that nourishes both body and soul. Meal plan with Plan to Eat helps reduce costs, reduces time spent planning and shopping, helps you to eat better food, and allows you to have an answer for what's for dinner. I have teens, and that is one of the most common questions I get on a daily basis. Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, create a meal plan around your schedule, and then the software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. There's a full-time support team that is available to help you get started with an account and answer any questions you might have. Normally, Plan to Eat only has one sale each year, but for everyday wellness listeners, we are offering a special 20% discount on a yearly subscription. Sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/EWP, and the coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. Again, that's sign up for your free trial at www.plantoeat.com/EWP.
Out of curiosity and for the benefit of the listeners, do you know how many items are actually subsidized right now?
I'm not sure how many, but there are quite a few. I mean, basically corn, wheat, soy, sugar.
Yeah. That's what's proliferative in the processed industry. Yeah. It's interesting that, it was thought to be an altruistic and kind thing to do is turned into, monocropping on so many levels is detrimental. I had Rob Wolf on and he was talking about how that's really impacted things adversely from an agricultural perspective. And yet, and this could be a segue into talking about meat, but the reality is that there's a lot of suppression of information so that people aren't able to make good decisions. And this just kind of propagates one after another. It's like one seemingly benign decision, leads to a proliferation of poor decisions.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, American history is filled with this kind of thing. You have, ostensibly the right reasons for instituting a specific policy measure, and then people figure out how to corrupt it. And that's what we've got. So we have to basically dismantle that, which means we have to dismantle our current food system model. The food industry should be rewarded for doing the right thing, not the wrong thing. Now, they say, well, then they would not make money. And the answer is actually they would make probably more money if we rewarded them for doing the right thing. The problem is they're scared. They don't want to go there because, any change is bad as far as they're concerned. Example, look at seatbelts. Okay. Seatbelts save lives. Yes, of course they do. All right. 1968, Australia instituted seatbelt laws, saved lives. They had the data. The big three, now the big two, in part because of this, kicking and screaming throughout the entire 1970s, did not want a seatbelt law. Finally, in 1979, there was an act of Congress that all new cars built in America had to have seatbelts. So did seatbelts save lives? No, because there was no mandate to wear them. Okay, so the seatbelts don't do a damn thing if you don't wear them. So it took Mothers Against Drunk Driving, working through the 1980s, to petition every state house in America that the seatbelt use was mandatory, click it or ticket, right? And so now do seatbelts save lives? Absolutely, right? So you have to have the education, you have to have the implementation, and you have to have the correct implementation strategy. Now, could we do that for food? Yes, we could, right? And in the book, I outline what each stakeholder in this argument has to be able to, come up with and to produce in order to make it work. And if we all did it together, it would absolutely work. But, that means everyone has to work together. And right now, no one's working together.
Yeah, absolutely not. And, I guess one of the questions I have, because I trained in inner city of Baltimore and had a kind of an eye-opening perspective on how people in urban centers really don't have access to a lot of the things that us suburbanites take for granted. So for individuals who've grown up, eating out of, the processed food industry's, treasure trove of options, and that's what they've eaten from the beginning of their life to the end of their life. How do we get real food to people, even if they don't want it, or even if they don't see the value in those changes? Because one of the things that I was privy, and I'm sure you have as well, being, inside of a large US city, was, this kind of disparity that you see in a lot of urban environments where people have this legacy of, multi-generational people that are dealing with the same health problems that are just getting worse with each subsequent generation.
And so they think it's genetic because, oh, my mother had diabetes, so of course I'm going to get it. Yeah, because you ate the same crap. That's why. It's not genetic, it's environmental, but you live in the same environment, so don't be surprised. So the short answer to this is that there has to be a policy directive to making this happen. And we can divide policy directives into two forms: carrots and sticks, inducements and punishments. And what the data show is that no inducement works, no punishment works. But if you yoke the inducement and the punishment together and do both at the same time, that is what Cass Sunstein and Michael Thaler, called nudge. They wrote a book called Nudge about the carrot and the stick together, yoked. Okay. Example. I afford this example in the book. 1977, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavian countries, huge alcohol problem. Okay. And it was a problem on both sides of the ledger. It was a problem on the positive side of the ledger in terms of people calling in on their benders, on Monday morning because they'd been drinking all weekend. Okay. And it was also a problem on the negative side of the ledger because of car accidents and cirrhosis of the liver. Okay. So these three countries, recognizing the problem, banded together and passed two pieces of related yoked legislation. The first was they nationalized all the liquor stores. So everyone sold the same fare at the same price. You couldn't go someplace else and buy it cheaper. The price was the price. The second piece of legislation was they taxed high alcohol spirits, and they used the money from the tax to subsidize low alcohol beer. So zero-sum game for the countries. They didn't make any money off of it. Okay, but what they did was they provided the punishment, the tax, with the inducement, the subsidy. Okay, differential subsidization, it's called. All right, and lo and behold, the entire population of Norway, Sweden, Denmark gravitated toward low alcohol beer. And sure enough, productivity went up and car accidents and cirrhosis of the liver went down. And they plotted that over a 20-year period and showed the decline, and then it leveled out and it's still low. And so those policies are still in place today if you go to visit those countries because it worked, right? Carrot and stick. So how could you do this for the American food industry? Why couldn't we tax soda and use the money from the tax to subsidize water, as an example? So there are things we could do. There are ways to make this happen. There are ways to provide inducements that basically you couldn't, you make them an offer they can't refuse, right? In addition, we can get insurance to play. So what if people ate healthier and the insurance company paid for the healthy food, but actually provided a tax or an increase in fees if people ate less well, okay? So there's an inducement to try to eat healthier. I work with a company, a startup, that has built a digital platform called Foogal, F-O-O-G-A-L, which I describe in the book, which is basically a platform that ties four stakeholders together: the patient, the doctor, the grocery store, and the insurance company, to provide healthy food and have it paid for by the insurance company. And the insurance company is happy to do it because the cost of the food is 1/10 the cost of the medicine, and the insurance company gets to keep the rest.
Incredible incentive.
So there are ways to do it. Okay, we have to want to. And, the problem is at this point, people are still on calories.
Yes.
So they think it's, your own fault, which it's not. And so that's why I had to write the book, is to explain what the real problem is. But, haters going to hate.
Well, I think it comes down to the significant degree of cognitive dissonance that people want to believe what they want to believe. And whether it's hanging on to that calories in, we call it CICO, calories in, calories out. And that's the mentality they want to ascribe to. I know just personally, there's not one day on social media that I don't get a question about calories. and having to dispel. I'm like, it's more about hormones than about calories. But people don't really, and
about insulin.
Yes.
It's all about insulin.
Yeah.
Okay. And calories have very little to do with insulin, because the thing that has the most calories is fat. Okay. Generates the lowest insulin response.
Someone that wears a continuous glucose monitor intermittently throughout the year, it's been amazing in a metabolically healthy individual, to see the impact of different types of macronutrients. Now, I want to be respectful of your time, but I did get quite a few questions about seed oils. There were quite a few people who were curious to know what your opinion was on seed oils, which are these oils that are touted as being, superior to other types of oils.
Garbage.
Yeah, exactly.
Seed oils are primarily omega-6s, linoleic acid, and you need omega-6s. I'm not saying you don't. Okay. Omega-6s are the precursors for arachidonic acid, which is the primary driver of inflammation. Okay. It gets turned into prostaglandins, other compounds that are involved in, the inflammatory response. If you don't have an inflammatory response, you'll be eaten by the maggots, so you need inflammation. You need to be able to generate inflammation. But it turns out the more omega-6s, the more inflammation. And we now know that inflammation is bad for cardiovascular health and for, longevity. So, we are supposed to have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about between 1-to-1 and 3-to-1. We currently have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 20-to-1, in some cases 25-to-1. All right. So we need to bring the omega-6s down and bring the omega-3s up. Well, the omega-6s are what's in seed oils, because you can put those on a shelf. And the omega-3s, unfortunately, they rot and they smell like fish.
Yep.
And so they don't really go into processed food very easily. And so basically, if you're eating a processed food diet, you're not getting your omega-3s, and you're getting way too many omega-6s. And guess what? You're going to get sick from that.
Yeah, I think that they are probably the worst thing next to sugar. Sugar is the number one, but distinctive number two, based on what I've been seeing the last several years are, soybean oil. I think Ben Bickman was saying is the number one consumed fat in the United States.
Yeah, probably because we have a lot of soybeans, because they're a commodity.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is the problem. And, we were told that these were good things. Oh, vegetable oil is good because it's not animal fat. Well, you know what? Actually, animal fat is cardiovascularly neutral. Saturated fat is not good for you. I'm not making it good for you. It's not bad for you. Okay. It's in the middle. All right. There's 7 classes of fats. Okay. And here they are in order of good to bad. All right. Omega-3s save your life. Monounsaturates, okay, generate PPR alpha in the liver, which is a fuel gauge in your liver. Number 3, polyunsaturated fatty acids. The problem with them is they easily turn into trans fats when you fry them too hot. Number 4, saturated fat, cardiovascularly neutral, but very good to fry in. Number 5, medium chain triglycerides. Now, everybody wants MCTs to work, and they can work, but only if you haven't also eaten a lot of saturated fat with it, because then your liver gets overwhelmed and then you end up with fatty liver. Number 6, omega-6s, which again, pro-inflammatory. And finally, number 7, trans fats, which are the devil incarnate. But we know that now, and they're coming out of our food. All right, so 7 different classes of fats. They're all 9 calories per gram. Calories are the same. Okay, one will save your life, one will kill you. Okay, and everything in between. So calories are useless. Calories are worthless. Okay, it's the biochemistry of the molecule. That's called science. Dietitians learn science.
I've been so thrilled and excited. I could talk to you for hours. I want to be respectful of your time. So what are you doing that's new? Obviously, your book just came out fairly recently. What else are you up to?
Oh, I'm up to a lot of stuff.
I figured.
I got a lot of stuff on my plate. I am the chief medical officer of 4 separate companies, and we are evaluating different ways to try to improve metabolic health. I am working with an international food conglomerate to basically redo their entire portfolio to make metabolic health its North Star. It is outside the United States. but to sort of as a role model for other companies to be able to come, to do. And I'm also an advisor to several companies that are, in the metabolic health sphere, looking, for instance, at continuous glucose monitoring and other facets of metabolism that might help. A surgical company that is using magnets to change GI physiology to benefit obese patients. Various things.
Well, it sounds amazing. How can my listeners connect with you, purchase your new book, which is going to be on my list of must-reads for 2021? What's the easiest way to connect with you on social media or off your website?
Well, so I have a website, robertlustig.com. The book has its own website, metabolical.com. They're linked. The reference list for the book is on metabolical.com because the reference list is 1,054 references and would have basically taken up 70 pages and $5 per book. So we put it online instead. Bottom line is I'm very available. I'm easy to find. I'm easy to reach. If you're going to buy Metabolical, I prefer you buy it at a bookstore, not from Amazon. Okay. And the reason is because we have to support our local bookstores because bookstores are happiness. People learn in bookstores. They don't learn on Amazon. All right. And I promise you, you'll be happier walking into a bookstore. So please support your local bookstore. I have a Twitter account. I have a LinkedIn account. I try to stay off Instagram. That's kind of a bad place to be. And God knows you'll never find me on Reddit. But I'm easy to find.
Fair enough. Well, it's been a pleasure this afternoon. As I said before, I could talk to you all day long. You are speaking my language and obviously talking about things I'm really passionate about. Thank you again for your time.
My pleasure, Ms. Thurlow. Bottom line is we healthcare professionals, okay, we need to get woke. We need to, stick together. We can help solve this crisis, but only if we know what we're doing. So thank you for your advocacy.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Wellness. If you loved this episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and remember, tell a friend. And if you want to connect with us online, visit the link in the show notes.